The IRMACS Centre is proud to present the SFU Fellows of the Royal Society of Canada Seminar Series. This bi-weekly series hosts 5 presentations per semester. For the spring 2013 semester, the presenters belong to the Departments of Economics, Physics, Humanities, and the Faculty of Education. Today's speaker is Dr. Kieran Egan from the Faculty of Education.
I have no idea how to introduce Kieran to you. His breadth of accomplishments is so extensive and so far-reaching that anything that I say will not do justice to what you're about to hear and who you're about to see. I was informed just beforehand that he's mostly known as being the number 2 long jumper in England in his age class. So able to leap tall buildings with a single bound is now also in his impressive CV. Let me read you what I have been able to put together. The problem I have in introducing Kieran is that he's such an engaged and such a prolific scholar. He's made substantive and varied contributions to educational practice right around the world. And any summary of that just, I don't think, does a whole lot of justice. Perhaps a tagline from the website of the Imaginative Education Research Group, of which he is the director, comes closest: a new way of thinking about practicing education. And that's kind of a tagline that summarizes a great deal of Kieran's work. This lesser light in education from Harvard, name of Howard Gardner, you may have heard of, said of Kieran Egan, "He is one of the most original big thinkers in education." Indeed, I say. Kieran comes to us from humble beginnings in Clonmel, Ireland, and went over to England to do his Bachelor of Arts degree, and eventually finding his way to the US, where in 1972 he finished his PhD at Cornell. That same year, he joined the Faculty of Education at the Simon Fraser University, and he's been busily influencing educational practice around the world ever since. I think great minds often start with very, very simple sounding questions. All Kieran sought to do was develop a comprehensive theory of education, and starting with the question, what does an educated person look like? And if we do some reverse engineering, how might we help prepare young people to become that educated person? I've been most impressed by 2 pillars of his work. One, the imaginative education movement, which asserts that the process by which we engage in learning is way more important than the domain of knowledge or the content of that learning, and that those processes of deep engagement operate through 5 typical zones. And if we use those properly, we develop toolkits that people can use as they reflect on and move through their adult life. The second area, which kind of stems from the first, is the learning in depth movement, where children are exposed to a topic very early on and develop substantive knowledge around that topic as they move through their school years. But in so doing, they develop one of the things that, as a counseling psychologist, I always teach and preach is the most critical component of any transition, and that's developing the confidence to engage in whatever you're facing. A very short list of accomplishments: 1991, the Graumeyer Award in Education from the University of Louisville. Just to tell you what that was about: to stimulate the dissemination, public scrutiny, and implementation of ideas that have potential to bring about significant improvement in educational practice. So he won that in 1991. 1993, admitted to the Royal Society of Canada. In 2000, he was named as a foreign associate to the National Academy of Education in the US. 2001, kind of a busy year. He was a Killam Research Fellow and also named to a Canada Research Chair. And in 2010, the Utne Reader named Kieran one of the 25 visionaries who are changing the world. Ladies and gentlemen, Kieran Egan.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. It's very flattering always to hear these introductions. I feel as though I don't want to start talking now and prove how wrong you are, but thank you. So mainly I just want to talk about one particular idea about what we can do with schooling, but I should maybe start with a very brief history of education. So we'll start about 200,000 years ago, which was, as far as one knows, the evolutionary story. Seems to be the point at which the last major brain spurt in the size of human brains, which led to the problem of how do you give birth to bigger brains and allow women still to walk fast, etc. Not at the same time, but and this creates the peculiarity in the natural world of human childhood, which needs a kind of attention that other animals don't need to deal with, and it particularly gets added in complexity over the years when we get our history of education goes on to about maybe 100,000, 60,000 years ago, with the increasing articulacy of language leads to a whole new way in which human beings have to deal with childhood and create systems of what we now happily call education to bring children into the world to share a set of ideas, beliefs, commitments to the tribe that they are a part of. And that tended to be done very successfully. Basically, we told children stories that told them who they were, what they were doing, why the group they belonged to is the best group and all the other groups were inferior. A kind of storytelling we still persist in, as anybody who goes to a history class in Surrey or Vancouver will learn about. How Canada is the superior place. Strangely enough, the French do the same. They can't really understand it. For French children, they get the same peculiar notion that their group is particularly privileged in some form. So the next step in the history of education, so we've got big brains and we've got language, and we have a peculiarity of childhood. And then I suppose we became very good at what you could call socializing children, that is fitting them in, making them harmonious with the group that they were born into. The next part of the story, the next big idea in education is essentially Plato's, that he came along about 2,500 years ago and suggested that the ways in which the well-socialized person made sense of their lives and the world around them was utterly disgraceful. And if you had a thing like a human mind, you had a responsibility to work out what was the truth about reality. And that became, for many people, amazing. He and Aristotle introduced what we could think about as an educational reform movement that has had astonishing success. And for the next little while, it was very, very hard to think about education without believing that somehow what you had to do was teach children the things that would enable them to discover the truth about reality. That is, what they inherited, the stories they inherited from their parents, background, society, were almost certainly all lies. And if you have a mind, the responsibility that comes with it is to work out what the truth is. So this notion of discovering the truth about the world around us has been one of the cornerstones of an educational program. And it remains a part of what they try to do in Burnaby and Surrey and in the schools, with greater or lesser success. Now, the next step in our educational history, so we're galloping fast, it's 200,000 years ago, 60,000, 2,500, and about 2,500 years ago was the next, and as far as I can work out, the last idea in education, and that is Jean-Jacques Rousseau's. Rousseau had this notion that minds were very like bodies, that is, bodies go through regular stages of development if they're given appropriate nutrition. Then similarly, minds go through regular stages of development. And the trick of the educator is to work out what those stages are and then to teach children accordingly. It's just a superstition, as you probably know, that we go through the minds go through stages of development and that they're like bodies in that regard. There's no particularly compelling reason to think that, but at the same time, it is one of the ideas that pretty well everybody in education has taken on board. They believe that young children are think in a certain way, and the influence on that thinking is something that's determined by the mind's own ways of making sense of the world. And all it needs is appropriate interactions with an environment for these to go forward in a regular way, which is very much Rousseau's argument, which has been taken up by more recent psychologists like Jean Piaget, who has had immense influence on education. I think most of it malign, but that's another issue for another day. So that's the history. Now the problem is that what Rousseau did say, that the best educational thinker before him was Plato. And Plato's notion that somehow the trick of education was to learn the kinds of things that would enable the mind to overcome the delusions and seductions of language and the stories that we're told as young children, is one that I think people have not of late attended to adequately, because we're all carried in education, the notion that somehow there are these stages of development and processes of learning, etc., dominates a lot of the thinking about what teachers should be taught to do and what actually happens in schools. The idea that children need to know a lot has become less fashionable. That is, if you want to be resistant to the seductions of a world full of nonsense, then one of the key features is that you simply know a great deal. And we have not, I think, paid adequate attention to that. So this is just it's a small program that we introduced a little while ago. And I'm not sure what I have to point this at to make the thing work. Thank you. So if you look at the criteria for being educated that most people have argued for, they include that, obviously, that you know a lot about the world around you in a sort of superficial way, the kind of thing that fills the curriculum. So we teach children, how they got here, what the world's like, where the bits of land are, where the people are, something about the history that leads up to the present day, or it's present-day Burnaby, as it were, because, if you don't attend too much to the history of people in other places, but you privilege your own history and your own story as a part of this process. And you have to learn a lot of utilitarian knowledge, and particularly a big focus on the kinds of things that you need to know for the kind of job that we hope you're going to get. So the function of the way in which the school is tied into the economy is fairly crucial for the ways in which we do the jobs of education today. And that utilitarian knowledge is crucially important and replaces a lot. If you're in a, I don't know, 10,000 years ago, no, 100,000 years ago, if you were hunting mastodons, the curriculum would have involved a lot of knowledge about how to hunt down mastodons, etc. And today, if it's, kids are expected to know much more about computers, so they're taught about computers. So that whatever happens to be the dominant methods of employment in the society become a huge determiner of the curriculum in schools. And and we include some exposure to the arts. We don't expect it will take. If you ask any teacher what they do about teaching kids something more than kiddie music, they will say, oh, well, we expose them to Schubert's symphonies, but we don't expect them to actually ever listen to them again. But there's a sense that there's no feeling that these also are things that you need to be educated in, that doesn't just happen. Anyway, but it's just this. It's a very superficial, casual acquaintanceship with a lot of the kind of knowledge that is going to make you into a good citizen able to do a reasonable job. It doesn't care very much about all the other potentials of human beings. It's a fairly utilitarian activity. Now, the other thing that most of the big educators have said, people like Plato indeed, is that you also need to know something in depth, because if you don't know something in great depth, there's a way in which you never come to understand the nature of knowledge itself. Now that's a funny kind of claim, because it's slightly vague, and it's difficult to make as an argument that this is crucial. It's difficult to make because most people just never have the experience of learning anything in depth. So it's very hard to persuade people of the value of doing this, because after all, they're good citizens doing adequate jobs. Why should they feel inadequate in some way? And indeed, most of the teachers that we turn into the schools themselves have had this first part, the breadth stuff, and we select them for being good at having done this breadth kind of knowledge, and they themselves have never done this other part. So that how do you persuade a teacher that it's crucial that their children should learn something in depth? Well, that's a part of what keeps us awake at night. Now, one of the arguments for it is this kind of thing you get from Van Gogh, that if you're a master of one thing, mistress of one thing, understand one thing, you have an insight into many things. That understanding something about the way knowledge works is fairly crucial for the way in which you respond to the rest of the world around you. So learning in depth is a very simple way. It's a fairly, in fact, I'm not quite sure why it hasn't been done much before, but it's a very simple response to this, to try to introduce into the school system a new way of thinking about a tiny sliver of the curriculum. So typically at the moment, we're trying to persuade teachers only to give up an hour a week for this. So you might say in future, if this works, Sarah will arrive at school, and the first week or so, maybe, there will be a ceremony. And at the ceremony, Sarah will be given a topic. And these topics will be randomly selected, so you'll get apples, the circus, railroads, beetles, etc., etc. So, and then you will build a portfolio on that topic for the rest of the 12 years of your schooling. So that by the end of your schooling, or by the end of every child's schooling in the future, everybody would be an expert on something. They would know as much about apples as almost anybody on Earth. Okay? And they work in collaboration with their teachers, the guy across the hall, the parents. We invite anybody to help doing this. And they will have every year at least, sometimes some schools do more than once a year, they have an opportunity to demonstrate, to make a presentation on the knowledge that they have accumulated. And each student ideally graduates with true expertise. So here is Sarah. This is a school actually in Portland in Oregon. This man at the back is the principal, who's actually a very thin man, but for some reason the photograph has been expanded a little. And these are the kids who are just getting their topics. And these are parents and siblings, etc. And they're going to go off and have milk and cookies afterwards. And Sarah will open her thing and say, I've got apples, you know. And with the portfolio, she also gets 3 questions about apples, or 3, did you know that, you know, about apples, just to start her off. And then she can ask anybody else for help, and she can start building her portfolio. So these, in case you're in doubt, are about what an apple is. These are pictures of apples. So what she will do is regularly meet with her teachers for suggestions about how she can build her portfolio, carry on with it. And she'll explore all kinds of resources with her parents and friends, and she can share resources with peers. We have a website for this, and we put on about 120 topics, suggesting that would probably be enough. In every class, each child would have a different one, but it would mean that in any school over a few years, you'd get kids in grade 4 maybe having the same topic as Sarah as she enters the school, and they can work together in various ways. And it's rather nice. We have in Burnaby some kids doing this in the grades 10, 11, 12, I think, in Burnaby Senior Secondary School, and other kids in grades 1, 2, and 3, I think, is it Forest Grove, the one at the bottom of the mountain? So, and we've had days when the big kids get together with the little kids who share topics, and it's quite touching, actually. And anyway, so she makes the presentation. So over the years, what Sarah's going to do in building her portfolio is look at, you know, the biology of apples. She'll learn there are about 7,200 varieties, and then start wondering why there's only 6 in the supermarket. And she'll learn that apples begin in Kazakhstan. All the sweet apples that we know are derived from a set of trees that still are producing in Kazakhstan, though I understand there's a fungus on the leaves of some of these ancient some of the trees, which is causing some distress. She'll learn something about physics as a result. She'll learn about Yeats's silver apples of the moon and golden apples of the sun. So she'll build anything to do with apples is fair game for her portfolio, and she'll learn about health and genetics, ecology, art. And she'll endless ways in which she can explore apples. She can do field work. She can start by going down to the supermarket, getting one of each of the apples that are there, and maybe starting a little little plan in which she indicates which is the apple, does a little drawing, maybe gives stars to them depending on how much she likes them, etc. And she can use libraries, the internet if she needs. We try to discourage use of the internet. One of our fears with this is that Sarah gets apples on day 1, and on day 2, Dad downloads 55 gigabytes of information and says, the portfolio is full. And she can do experiments, web searches, etc., etc., etc. And over time, the charts she devises will become a little bit more sophisticated. And in the end, she'll become an expert. That is, she'll know about that topic from the inside. Now, a few words about the nature of the topics. I mean, not anything will do, because this has got to be studied for 12, 13 years maybe in schooling. Now, many of the teachers feel that it's somehow a constitutional right that a child be allowed to choose their topic. So we have a great deal of difficulty persuading teachers that actually randomly assigning topics works best, particularly with young children. Later on, we allow them some kinds of choices, but initially it's a bit of a problem. But the topics themselves need to be complex, varied, multidimensional. So they themselves must have sufficient breadth and depth. They must have some, what I'm here calling multidimensional richness. They must be tied in some ways to human history, and that it has complex relationships with human beings. So some animals, for example, horse might do as a topic, but some animals, I'm not sure about armadillos. It depends where you live, I suppose. But you have, not all of them will satisfy this criterion. It mustn't be concerned with material that will lead to depression or violence. I thought one good topic was tools, and then I thought, weapons is another good one, but then thought you can't really have a child for 12 years studying how to hack other people to pieces and kill them, so weapons had to go. And there's a few others that you would dismiss on that criterion as well. Mustn't be too technical, especially at the beginning. I thought that the moons of Saturn might have been rather nice, but given the SIBO as well. But I just thought there's too much technical knowledge required up front for the child to get into it. Medieval Persian pottery is the same, but the 5-year-old can't really learn enough about glazes and all the rest of it to make that work very well. So you need something that the child can get their hands on in some way locally. I was talking to a guy in Romania who was starting this, and I was suggesting fish is a good topic, and he said, well, maybe so for you on the west coast of Canada, but let me assure you, in the middle of Romania at the moment, and there's not a huge variety for children to really get dug into. I'm not sure that was a compelling argument, but it mustn't be too general. So animals is too big a category. Bengal tigers may be a bit too particular, but cats would be good. You can classify them, you can organize the cats in different forms, you can learn a great deal about catness. And there must be adequate local materials available for the early years, and also this acceptable to parents and caregivers. We had one of the topics was sacred buildings, but of course for some parents there are sacred buildings, and then there are the hellholes of Satan that are the other churches and temples and whatever they might be. So one had to be a bit cautious about the kinds of topics and giving the parents some kind of control over them. So these are just a few of them: ancient ruins, birds, spices, writing systems, fungi, ships. However, there are some potential objections. No doubt many of them already will have occurred to you. One is that students will get bored. And the answer, of course, to this is that boredom is a product of ignorance, not of knowledge. That is, one of the underlying principles of this is that everything is wonderful, if only you know enough about it. And the problem with the experience of boredom in schooling, I think, is tied in very closely to the fact that one learns everything so superficially. You never really learn anything, typically, to the depth at which the imagination becomes engaged. And it's only when you learn a great deal about something that you understand how well it works. And also the other feature, of course, is that one of the things that happens to these kids is they discover quite quickly, not that they know everything about apples after about 3 months, which would be their usual experience in school. I've been studying this for 3 months, I know everything, we move on to something else. But in this case, they learn how little they know. So one of the nice features of this, it does tend to induce a degree of humility about our very tenuous grasp on the pitiful amount of knowledge we actually have about the world and our lives. it's not a line to use in universities too readily, maybe because we feel proud at how much we know, but actually in every area it's pitifully little. Another one is this the thing about students should be given some choice. I think that there's all kinds of problems around this. If you open it up for children in kindergarten or grade 1 and give them a choice in their topics, you'll get 5 princesses, 3 horses, 7 dinosaurs, etc. So, and they are not necessarily, dinosaurs is not a bad topic, but most of them do not carry the mind forward for 12 years in the same easy, ready way. So we do, and there are many other reasons. One of the problems, in school, we do not give children choice about anything we think is significant. So as soon as you announce you have a choice, you also announce that this is fairly trivial, and if you get bored in a couple of weeks, you can have another choice. We do not say to children, we're doing algebra today. Anybody not like algebra? We feel that there are reasons where we compel, in some ways, the kinds of things children are expected to do. And there's a number of other reasons. I think the psychological dynamics of having a choice for a very young child are not ideal for this project. And the teachers who have insisted on doing it, as one teacher insisted that she was unimpressed by all these arguments. Not that I've given them many, but there is a book that goes with this that has about 7 arguments for why the choice for very young children is not a good idea. And she nevertheless gave the children choice, and she ran into a few problems. The next year she confined the choice. She gave them a choice among many, and then she chose the last one, thinking she knew about the children. That didn't work so well. The only thing that has worked well for her is absolute random assignment of topics. Anyway. Why would you force a student to learn so much about a limited and possibly useless topic for years? And again, this comes from, I think, the expectations of what our schools are supposed to do. They're supposed to teach useful knowledge and not a lot of any particular area unless, when you start, specializing in some vocational activity. But on the whole, the idea that you would learn something about something for 12 years that has no product is, I think, very puzzling to a lot of people. And I'm not sure there's a very easy answer, because it's a part of, you only feel the importance of this when you've experienced it. And so the arguments all sound very formal and not terribly convincing, it seems to me. But it does give you a sense of the pleasure of learning. One of the things that tends to happen to these kids as they work on their portfolios is that they enjoy it. We have on the website a bunch of quotes from kids. Very many of the kids who go through the program say it's their favorite activity in school. Largely because they decide how it goes. They can, as long as they're studying apples, they can spend a year looking at apples in art if they want to. There's no pressures of any kind, as long as they're building their knowledge about their topic. We do get a lot of people saying, you're forcing children, as though we do anything else. We force them to come to school to learn about democracy and stuff, which is all a bit strange. It wouldn't be suitable for children requiring special education. Oddly enough, there are 2 groups we have found seem to respond best to this. One are the gifted, and you can imagine, intuitively see why that would work. These kids just love something they can get on by themselves and not be hindered. And the other, indeed, are these kids who have great difficulties learning. And the idea that they have a topic of their own, and there's no pressures on what they should study and how they would study it. Oddly enough, after a year or so, you find that they have, because nearly all the things these kids do, there is an implicit comparison with what is normal, and they are, of course, failing to compete with what is normal. But with this, after a year, if somebody's got the topic of apples, they suddenly realize they know more about apples than anybody else in the class. They know more about apples than their teachers. And it gives a kind of confidence and security that nothing much else in school does for these kids. So we've had some very positive responses. I'm not sure how general that's going to be, but so far it's looking interesting. Too complicated to organize? Yeah. That isn't proving to be the case. Impossible to grade? This is easy, it won't be graded. So this is entirely free of all the other features of grading. It's excessive rhetoric to say that all learning in schools is coerced. But to some degree, there's a kind of truth to it. That human beings like to learn. My favorite example is, do you know what state in the US is named after Julius Caesar? I was going to say, those of you who know the answer are not allowed to say. Do you know? If you'd like a clue. 55 BC, Caesar beat up the Britons. It was a lousy winter, so he withdrew his armies to these islands off the coast of Gaul, which is the French foppishly called France today. And these little islands off France became known as the Insulae Caesariae, Caesar's Islands. And Caesariae, what's the word, not degenerated, morphed. I'm sure there's a proper linguistic term for it, but changed over the centuries. Caesarea is Jersey. Okay, so Jersey, and actually I should say that's one possible derivation. But Jersey is probably derived from Caesar. So New Jersey is New Caesar properly, and those cows are Caesar cows. I'm not sure how I got to that from not being graded, but it suggested that human beings love to learn. It's nice to know that. It's going to be utterly useless to you. But even after you've forgotten that you were here today, you will remember that New Jersey is named after Julius Caesar, right? So your homework for tonight is to work out why that's the case, why you will remember that longer than anything else you'll hear today. Okay. Anyway, so it won't be graded. Human beings like to learn, and we've created an institution that makes learning unpleasant on the whole for most children most of the time. We do our best, and teachers are heroic, it seems to me, in the energy and ingenuity they bring to trying to make this institution work. But it's not an institution, because of its coercive nature, it's not one that makes learning the pleasure it ought to be. So one of the ways of making this program more pleasurable for children is indeed to remove that particular coercive aspect of it. If the kids want to stop doing the Learning in Depth project, they can stop at any time. If they want to stop for 6 months, they can stop for 6 months. They're not losing anything, they're continuing as usual. One of the other nice things in schools that means they spend, even though there's an hour a week only allotted to it, it's a great thing for teachers to be able to say when, half the class are still struggling away at some task and the others have already finished, saying, oh, well, why don't you just get on with your lid topic? And the kids eagerly will go off with their box or whatever they keep their lid material portfolio in. It won't get teacher buy-in. And that's true for many cases. We give lots of talks to teachers, usually get great enthusiasm from the teachers because they like the idea, but then they don't do it because, well, it's a pain in the butt. You've got to do all kinds of so many things. The pressures on teachers are enormous at the moment, particularly to get certain grades. It's hard to persuade a teacher that a kid studying apples will actually result in better grades on their maths tests. It's not an easy argument to make. But at the same time, we do get some teachers liking it and saying, that's really what I got into teaching for. The idea of working with enthusiastic learners on something that doesn't have any grading pressures on it, and we can just explore together. And they can do this with a lot of topics. So oddly enough, something I had not anticipated at all is a lot of the teachers, maybe 20% of the teachers, take a topic for themselves. That they randomly, they project our list on the board and they stick a finger and they start doing it for themselves. Partly because of the fun they see the kids having. So it means a little bit less time on watching Jeopardy or whatever on Facebook maybe, and they're rediscovering the joy of learning things in depth. When there's no pressures, there's no need. It's not for any vocational purpose. There's not going to be an exam. They're going to get no particular credit. They're just going to have pleasure. It won't get administrators buy-in. Same kind of argument. I was concerned that this would be a bit of a problem. Most of the administrators we talk to say, yeah, lovely idea, it's cheap, it doesn't, very small time constraints. The major expenses to buy a little folder for each kid or a box or whatever. IKEA boxes seem to be very popular for the portfolios. But they then, most administrators say they'd love to do it, but the teachers would never go for it. And the teachers often would say, we'd love to do it, but the administrators won't go for it. So I think that looking for those kinds of reasons means it's not picking up as fast as I might like. And for students, there are fairly obvious kinds of benefits. It provides opportunities to acquire expert knowledge, teaches all kinds of skills that they can apply in other areas. We had one little example a while ago, a teacher who'd been doing learning in depth with a group of kids for 3 years in her school, and the kids were then going on to another class. I think it was a grade 6 class with a new teacher coming into the school. But the classes were being blended in various ways, so that this new teacher was getting a half lid kids, as we call them, and a half kids who knew nothing about the program. And he came, and the teacher had felt that she couldn't go up to him as he'd arrived in the school and say, we've got this extra program you should maybe be thinking about. She said she thought she'd leave it for a while and see what kinds of pressures began to play on him. And he came to her after a few weeks and said, I've got this weird class. He said, I introduced a new topic. He said, half the kids, they get down to work, they're excited, they want to know things, what they can do. And the other half, he said, more like normal kids, you have to jolly them along, persuade them, tell them to remember their pencils, etc. And he said, I can't understand it. And of course, she wanted the names of the kids who were these eager beaver types, and predictably, it was all the lid kids, because they had not only learned how to use the skills that they were finding, help them organize and develop their portfolio, but they were bringing also the assumption that learning should provide pleasure. And also they brought skills that they had been acquiring. That's one anecdote, recognizing that the plural of anecdote is not data, but it's happening a fair amount. It engages students' imaginations and emotions, and that is very clear. Now, I'm not sure how generalizable this is going to be, because the first schools, I should have given you some background about this, which I'll do at the end of this, I guess. But we do get kids engaged in their portfolios and their topics the way they don't usually get engaged in schooling. Removes the vulnerability of ignorance. Well, we'll see. That's the one about, if you know something in depth, you're less likely to believe nonsense, about anything. So the National Enquirer's sales ought to go down if this program takes off. Builds confidence. It clearly does that with the kids. They become confident learners. They like to learn, they come in, and they like to work on their portfolios. And many of them do a lot of work at home. So a lot of the schools give the kids a box or whatever it is in the school for their portfolio, and then a traveling folder that they bring to and fro. And the other thing that they use this folder for, again, I hadn't anticipated at all. I thought of this as a very lonely kind of activity. You'd be working on your portfolio. Good training for autistic kids, maybe, but it's turned out to be strangely social, because what is happening is that the kids in any classroom, they know the names of all the other students, of course, but also they know at least as well their topics. So Sarah is apples, and it's like a totem animal, and the kids take on their identity. Is a part of, their topic is a part of their identity. And it leads to so that when Sarah's at home looking for something on apples, she's finding out something about cats. So she brings that in for John, who's doing cats, and she brings in something else. So all of the kids start after a while bringing in more and more stuff for all the other kids, and they feel a kind of easy pleasure, responsibility, and helping the others build their portfolios. Again, not something that had been expected. And there are no doubt better ways of building solidarity. And teachers, well, they seem to like these features. And for the school, it can provide a nice, if you wanted to go over to Burnham Mountain, what's it, Highlands, University Highlands, I've got it the wrong way around. Thank you. Just on the campus here. You'll see this is a school in which all the kids are doing learning in depth. They started with just a little small group. The principal, very, I think, conscientious and intelligent woman, and just thought she'd try it for a while, a year, with some small group, and then she expanded it. And then this last year, all the kids are doing it, all the teachers and all the kids. And you can see the impact on the school. If you go in, you've got lots of things to do with learning in depth are spread around the school, so that we have a lot of video now of the kids working away on their topics together. It's really quite touching. So it does affect and enrich, I think, the culture of the school. So what do we do next? So, okay, I should have started with something about the history. That is, I was an idea. I wrote a book called The Future of Education, which is a dangerous thing to do, because you're expected then to indicate. So I had to invent a bunch of programs. And if we have a minute, I'll show you another one that we're peddling at the moment. So this was one that was going to be introduced in 2030, I was talking about it to a group of our Master of Education students, and two of them decided they'd just give it a try. They didn't tell me about it. They just went back to their schools, and this was in 2009. So in that year, we had about 30 kids doing this, one group in Victoria and another group in Langley. The following year, there were about 2,000 kids doing it. And so that's 10. And at the moment, we've just lost track of the numbers of kids, and it's being done. There are schools in Australia, England, Greece didn't quite get going, I understand, maybe. And so quite a number of countries, Japan, China, you know. And we've got, I don't know, in the Lower Mainland, there must be 20 or 30 schools now have started doing it. What tends to happen is that one or two teachers who are a little bit eccentric give it a try, and the impact is quite evident to the other teachers. So the next year, usually there's 3 or 4 teachers and then 5 or 6 teachers, so it tends to spread a little bit that way. And once it's going in one school, you tend to find schools around beginning to take it up. So that process is underway, but it may be about the mushroom effect. It goes up and then just comes to pieces. There's nothing to sustain it adequately. So we'll see. So that it's an ongoing story. So what I should do is pause advertising the book carefully. Copies for sale at the door. Oh, no. Are there questions, comments, abuse, money, anything?
Yeah, I just wanted, you mentioned generalization or scale, or just as you said now, the mushroom. I wondered, and you also had that example about the father downloading gigabytes of data. I mean, it seems to me there's a finite number of topics that are really good that you can do. And then students, as you get in the community, they're all going to know, there's sort of be a set bunch of projects that will have explored it. And then how did the next student be fresh, I guess, is kind of what I'm wondering.
Yeah, so far that has not become a problem, obviously. We haven't been doing it long enough. And I foresee that possibly would be a problem. But oddly enough, the indicators that we are getting at the moment of older kids who have learned a lot more about something and little kids working on suggest that usually the kids take such different approaches to it. Every topic is infinitely diverse. And they are often surprised at what the other one has done. So we imagine, Sarah with her apples suddenly meeting, John at a party who's also got apples, but he's been studying the politics of apple selling. What country sells the most apples? How do they get traded? What are they? What country produces the most apples? Just so you can't claim you've learned nothing today. Sorry. No. Well, it's close, actually. China, obviously, yeah. And the US second. But oddly enough, we're finding that so far isn't a problem. And because if these things were exhaustible in a fairly straightforward way, I think that would obviously be a major concern. But it seems not to be. Thank you.
So you mentioned getting the teachers to give up an hour a week, and I'm just wondering what you would see as the ideal. What would the ratio? How many hours a week would you like to see?
Actually, an hour is not bad, because what does tend to happen is that in many schools, the kids are working outside of the school time, or there are some other things that allow them to do their lid topics. And a lot of the schools allow the kids to work on them during, some of the lunch breaks if it's raining outside. So there are lots of ways in which many of the kids in the schools that are doing this well seem to spend significantly more than they are. They are, in a way, is only the teacher time. So it's the time in which the teacher's available to help kids, make suggestions for other things they might do. We have, I should have brought, we have a lid kit, which has just come out, which is a box. And you open the box up, and it's got lots of suggestions for teachers. There's two little card sets. It's a bit like a Monopoly thing, where you flick over the thing, and it says, have you thought of any good jokes about your topic? Or have you explored your topic in regard to this? And so there are 104, I guess, because there are two card sets, of suggestions for the ways the kids might expand their topic. So there are lots of additions available to teachers to help them help the kids. But then we find that the class time is not when they do most of their work. I think University Highlands School, they give aside, I think it's either Wednesday morning or Wednesday afternoon, and all the kids are free to work on their topics, and they can work together and suggest things. And it's quite touching to go around and see the degree of engagement involved.
Yeah, just a quick question about, as far as that degree of engagement, you always have the kids that just excel and have those wonderful anecdotes. What about the kids that struggle or lose interest? What kind of things do you do in the program in order to re-engage students that disengage?
If it takes them behind the barn and we shoot. Oh no, sorry, that's another problem we deal with. My usual response until recently had been, we just don't seem to be having that problem. Up till last year, I was aware of no child wanting even to change their topic. No child wanting to, as it were, take time off, because they were just all. Now, since then we've got some shirk money to do one of these dissemination grants, just a small amount. So we've been able to hire a couple of people who are going around helping the teachers. Now, one of the problems that's resulted is that because we've been able to print up stuff, we've got a number of people who are interested in trying it out, but they don't want to do the proper preparatory work. They don't want to set up the right kind of ceremony, because the ceremony, I think, is quite crucial. You have to persuade the kids that this is a big deal, because it is a big deal. It's going to affect their lives in some significant way. So we've had people just, go in and Monday morning say, oh, we've got a new topic we're going to do today. Everybody's going to get, and I've got this list here, and you can choose your topics. So we've had cases like that where we've had children then who become a bit disaffected soon. Now, one of the responses has been this lid kit, and I've been sending it around. I shouldn't say this, but the publisher we're just getting the first copies now, but I've been sending the materials around by email to teachers so that they can see ways in which they can respond to kids who say things like, I've done it all, ways in which they can just help them carry on. In a country in which there was more cricket practice, you'd be able to just throw it up and there would be no problem catching it.
I was wondering, in my undergraduate classes, not every student has a love of learning. Other than waiting a decade for your students to get into my classes, what might I do now at the university level, do you think?
Well, there are a number of places have started when students, a number of places, but 3 or 4 that I know about. When students come into, as it were, a kinesiology program or a physics program, they are allotting topics for the 3 or 4 years that they will then follow. So they're choosing fairly generic topics that are central to the subject area, and then getting the kids to build portfolios that go through, apart from the regular course structure, but they give them some support during the time.
So you're suggesting it would be done on a departmental level, sort of thing?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, that would. Why did you ask me that? You had a better answer, more clear than I was.
So we can draw a distinction between topic-based learning and problem-based learning, right? As Carl Breiter has, and he's kind of bemoaned topic-based learning, saying that if you look at what happens in professional knowledge builders or knowledge workers, they really work with problems, right? Problems drive inquiry. So why does this, why does an apple fall from a tree? Now there's a germane problem that you can think about for a long time. So I understand that when dealing with young children, topic-based learning would be the way to go, and you can actually derive a number of problems from a topic. But there comes a point where children will go through a transition. I don't know, somewhere in high school where it's perhaps more, you can get more bang for your buck by assigning a problem to them. Because that leads to a different kind of thinking. Yeah. That we want to see develop. So, I guess one question I have is, well, how do you handle the problem versus topic, issue, and set of criticisms? And the other one is, when would you see this transition happening? But your answer to Brian's last question makes me think that you would persist with the topic-based learning in university, and that I'm not sure I would kind of follow you on that path, because problems, they take you places, and they bring you to new problems, and you can go pretty far from your original starting point when you're pursuing a problem-based approach as opposed to a topic-centered one.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, when I said to him he gave a better answer than I did, I didn't mean everybody could give the answers to my... sorry. But, sorry. I often think that one of the problems in education are the kinds of categories and the distinctions that are made and then are reified in ways that seem out of all proportion to the real world of inquiry that we engage in. So that the idea that there are these two separate, as though because we have a name for them, we have different things. We don't. I mean, they constantly intermingle in all kinds of ways. So it would be very hard to say that Sarah, trying to find out how many kinds of apples there are, is not engaged in a problem. So I'm not sure that that's. It's not a distinction that keeps me awake at night. And also, I think the more profound kind of response would be tied into the other work we do in the Imaginative Education Research Group, where what we're interested in is how kids' imaginations change as they acquire increasing amounts of knowledge about various things. So the answer is not that there is a transition from topic to problem, but rather there is a transition from what I would call a mythic, a sort of an approach that is story-oriented and uses images, etc., to one that then is shaped a little bit more by theoretical kinds of understanding. Now, and so along with the program come a recommendation that teachers recognize that there will be probably 3 or 4 transitions from the kind of interest that children will have in their topic, starting at grade, if they start in kindergarten, grade 1, then about grade 4, 5, there will be a transition, a significant change in the orientation to the topic. And we do recommend that at the end of each year, the children start, or the beginning of each year, they start by weeding out material from their portfolio and reorganizing it, doing a major reconceptualizing of what they've got there. And then there will be another significant change about ages 14, 15. So there's material to try to help teachers recognize how the ways in which children will engage the topic will change. And some of those you might recognize more contentedly as project-oriented. But I'm not sure the distinction is as clear a one as either you or Bereiter makes a fortune out of suggesting. But I'm not sure. Clearly we can obviously make that distinction, but I'm not sure in the real world of inquiry and studying history, science, mathematics, that it's one that plays a great deal of... Anyway, I'll shut up at this point, and we will agree to disagree, I suspect, about some of that. If we had more time, I'm sure... Yeah. Thank you.
So I'd love to get your response on a project that we're doing in the Faculty of Science, contrasting this individual topic to a larger scale. So we're looking at some curriculum revision in the lower divisions, and the 3 life science departments are looking at the possibility of developing a coordinated lower division program. And we're considering, instead of having separate courses on the classic hierarchy of life where one class will look at molecules and another might look at ecology, we have this level of organization that we would organize around courses that were topics. For example, sensation and reaction would be a title for a course, and then they would learn over that course, learn in depth things like perception, how animals see, look at the cellular level, look at the molecular level, from the physics of light to the biological responses of predators and prey. But that would be a topic that that would be curriculum level topics as opposed to individual topics.
Yeah. That resonates rather more with some of the other programs that we do with regard to imaginative education. How you would build those kinds of topics and which ones would have more energy for gathering more knowledge engagement. But this, I'm not sure, would be particularly useful for that. I think it has a use as long as it's besides a number of other ways of engaging. That sounds to me really interesting. What I'd like to talk about more are the particular, as it were, what I'd call the oppositions that you're building into things like predator-prey, or no, I missed the first one that you started. It was more general. But anyway, I don't know. Nice to talk more about that. Yeah.
I take it you haven't. I take it you haven't had any students going all the way from kindergarten up to grade 12 yet.
No.
I was wondering how many years individual students have actually gone through this. My second question is, how do you define success?
Yeah, it started in 2009. So we've got some schools that started very early. We have a charter school in Portland. I showed you the picture of. They do everything that the imaginative education group tells them to do, which is comforting to see how these things pan out. Which I should mention, incidentally, last year was identified in the Washington Post, I think it is, challenge program. They look at 2,900 schools across America. It came out as #2 school in America. All the other top 100 virtually were private schools, schools for the gifted. This is just a regular community school. So this is again, anecdote, not data. So no, they have been going, I think the kids have entered their 5th year now. 4th or 4th year, sorry. They're coming towards the end of the 4th year. So that's it. How do you recognize success? Well, we have done a couple of little projects that were moving in the direction of doing some more serious assessment. Mainly they were based, the 2 projects we've done so far have been almost entirely structured interviews with the teachers about their responses and how they would compare the work of the students with regular kinds of things that they were doing. Very informal, just trying to get a feel for how we would go about measuring the adequacy, success of a program that doesn't have and doesn't want to have the usual kinds of measures of achievement. But a lot will have to do with looking at the portfolios themselves, which we've started doing in an informal way for the kids who've been doing this a little while. And as you would imagine, there's enormous diversity among them. Diversity both in style, what you would probably, anybody would recognize as ability level that is being exemplified in the work. But you'll gather from the fact that I'm muttering now, I really don't know, that we're struggling precisely with that. And how, because if the program is going to go anywhere, we're going to have to show success. The fact that the kids love it very largely, and that the teachers who are doing it are astonished by the impact on the kids, is by itself insufficient. We need to start working on trying to show that a little bit more. And to show also, see, one of the questions we did some work on was what in education they call transfer. That is, how far do you see impacts on regular work in the school from the kids who are doing the LID program? And that there are very clear markers already after, and we're finding after 3 years. So we're watching closely, and that will be a part of what we'll start looking at for assessment. But you would know. I mean, you would go into a classroom, and you would know immediately. You wouldn't need to have too many tests to show that there is real enthusiasm here. These kids know a lot about their topics. I was giving a talk to a group of teachers a week or so ago, and a woman who was the chair of the school board in Langley had become quite interested in the topic and was going around some of the schools that were using it, and she was talking to a little boy whose topic was trees. He was age 6, and she said she was stunned at what he knew about trees, but more the enthusiasm he was showing, explaining to her and showing his portfolio. And she said she was just eager to ask him more questions, and he stopped her after a while and said, excuse me, thank you for your interest, but I've got work to do. and so said about, it was rather touching. Sorry, thank you for the question. I don't know.
Could I have one last question, perhaps? Anybody?
No, thank you. In fact, I have rather. I was going to say I've rather less to say than I.
I've got 2 things in mind here, but maybe we'll just get to one. It's your project has allowed you to learn in depth about this kind of learning in depth, and I'm just wondering what kind of conceptual boundaries have you come up against, in particular linguistic boundaries. This is kind of a weird question, but I've got something in mind. Have you found on occasion that the English language lacks certain terms that you need to describe educational problems and the kinds of children that are engaging in your project, right? Because I could see that this project might allow us to see interesting diversity. You've already alluded to it. These portfolios are diverse. The children, presumably, that are creating portfolios are diverse. They may be diverse in interesting ways, some of which are cognitive. Okay, so what I'm getting at is there will be some children who will distinguish themselves from the others by, the degree to which they get into this, etc. And the English language has not necessarily evolved to make fine discriminations about cognitive profiles or knowledge stuff, right? Or the knowledge economy, etc., is still relatively new. So I'm just asking you that general question, whether you've found that English has been conducive.
Well, one of the other programs I have, as you know, is this imaginative education, which tries to characterize the process of our education in terms of a somatic, mythic, romantic, philosophic, ironic kind of understanding. Ironic being the ultimate form of understanding in this scheme. And of course, one of the central features of ironic understanding is recognizing that our language is always inadequate for the purposes we have for it. So I wouldn't distinguish this particular project from everything else to do with my life, that my language is always inadequate for all of it. Just ask my wife, but we all recognize. I'm not sure that this I would distinguish particularly in lacking a vocabulary that would be useful. And of course, as you know, it's very dangerous always to introduce any kind of technical term. Indeed, mythic, romantic, philosophic, ironic can only get you into trouble because people carry with them all kinds of associations. And it may indeed be better to call bits of this, or invent a noise that suits it. But particularly if you're dealing with teachers, it is just on a pragmatic basis, it's best to try to stick. I may be missing the point of your question.
What adjective would you use to refer to a child who naturally likes to learn in depth? Or an adult for that matter? What's the best adjective?
I would say they're a child who naturally likes to learn in depth.
There's no adjective for it. Okay.
Well, philo, pro, academicus or something. You know, I mean, we could shape our languages. We were talking about phytoprogenitive earlier, but sorry, no, I can't think of it.
Well, I think that was an absolutely fantastic session today, both the talk and the questions and answers. I have about 100 questions and 0 minutes to ask them, so I'd like you all to thank Professor Egan again, and thank you for all the questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.